The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. And I have news. Gaia just got a whole lot better. They're rolling out a whole new series of member benefits for 2019. Get your first 2 weeks of Gaia for only 99 cents by going to Gaia.com/Jim and signing up. That's Gaia.com/Jim. Thanks, Gaia.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you once again. And I have one of my favorite people on the line. When I think of UFO researchers in 2019, one of the first names I think of, and you're starting to see him everywhere, is Ryan Sprague. He is a blogger. He's a podcast host. He's a burgeoning television personality. He's one of those people who is authentic, and I think also who is and is even going to be more successful in the years to come. And it's so good to see from somebody who is doing this for the right reasons, I believe, and seeing his research and his presence being so well accepted out there. And we're always glad to talk to him about UFOs. And of course, he has that great podcast, Somewhere in the Skies. And he's very accomplished as a writer, podcaster, TV personality. We're so glad to have him with us. UFO researcher Ryan Sprague, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Jim, for having me. It's always a pleasure. And I was so excited that you and honored that you had me on for your 2018 wrap-up, which was great as well. So it's good to be back again so soon.
Well, yes. Well, the thing is, I got to tell you, unless you get too busy, we plan on doing it every year, and we'd love to have you as a fixture on that panel. So good to have you talk with Clayton and Micah, and a lot of fun indeed. So I guess in the new year, the thing that lately has happened for you that's very exciting is you've become a television personality. You had that great special Roswell Mysteries Decoded, and people can still watch that online, by the way, for free, and we'll tell them how. But, I mean, how did that happen? And tell us about that project, because that's extremely exciting.
It seriously was one of those things, Jim, that came out of nowhere. You know, I'm a New York City kid. I'm Peter Parker. You know, I love my Queens. I've lived here. I was a struggling playwright for many, many years, but that's where my passion was, on the stage and writing plays and whatnot. But I had the opportunity to head out to Los Angeles for about 2 years and see what was going on out there in terms of the stage and film and all these things I've always loved growing up, besides the whole UFO topic. But of course, the UFO topic followed me out to Los Angeles, and I got hooked up with a television company who'd heard and seen some of my work, heard the podcast, and you know, it was one of those, you know, don't call us, we'll call you sort of things. They gave me their card and didn't hear anything for a while. And then boom, out of nowhere, they contacted me and said, hey, we want to go out to Roswell and investigate Roswell. And, you know, being a UFO researcher, I said, Roswell, not again. You know, it's been done a million times. It's that case, you know, it's the seminal case in ufology that always, that carrot dangling in front of us. We never find the answer, but we keep chasing it. So, you know, when they first said they wanted to do Roswell, I was a little hesitant, but the more I got involved and the more that I realized there was actually new stuff, new evidence that we could investigate, that's when I was excited to get out there and finally investigate for myself the Roswell UFO incident.
Now, I understand we want people to watch the show, and we'll give them where they can go and watch it for absolutely free. You don't have to be a member of anything, which is really cool. But just in a general sense of speaking, I mean, how can there be new things when you're looking at as a case as old as Roswell? We're talking over 70 years now. I mean, how can it be? How can there be new information? It seems almost impossible.
It does seem impossible. And, you know, again, that's kind of what we went in trying to challenge, that there can be new information out there. And what's more important, I think, Jim, is the network that decided to make this show, the CW network. For anyone out there who watches any CW shows, these are the guys who do Flash and Arrow and all these kind of teenage drama shows. And it appeals to a younger demographic.
Sure.
It really does, anywhere from age 12 and up through the 20s and 30s. And I found that very interesting that this was their first attempt at a scripted reality investigative television show, and they decided to do UFOs. So I was very excited about that. And I thought it was cool that we would be bringing the Roswell case to a whole new generation, people who may have never even heard of this incident or know anything about it. So even though we did give a historical context of the case and run over 70 years of what we do know and what a lot of people out there who study UFOs know, a lot of the people watching this for the very first time, it blew their minds. I got emails, I got messages about people being like, oh my God, I never knew any of this. But for those veteran researchers out there as well who know Roswell front and back, and there's a lot of them, we did want to also appeal to them. So we went out to the actual crash site, which is a story in itself of how we found that. When you speak to people in Roswell or who have investigated it, there's 10 different locations where this thing supposedly happened. But we were able to hook up with a geologist and earth scientist professor at a military institute in Roswell who was able to triangulate the location of where this actual event happened. And he found materials out there that we would eventually get tested, metals that he found out there that could supposedly be from a UFO crash. So that right there was kind of our big new thing to bring to the case, was getting these materials analyzed that this scientist had found out there. So very exciting, among many other things we discovered when we got there.
Well, it's interesting because I think that sometimes, and I'm guilty of this too, well, everybody knows X about Roswell, but almost everybody that knows X about Roswell hasn't been there or maybe hasn't done the firsthand research. It reminds me of a professor that I had one time who was very much into the practical application of his discipline. And he said, most students are taught by people who have done nothing but read from books, who were taught by people who did nothing but read from books. And I guess there's a certain value of kind of doing that primary research, even though it's been done, because it's like a game of telephone, right? One person tells another person, tells another person, tells another person, and by the end, you've got a totally different story. So I'm guessing you even cleared up some misconceptions maybe even you had.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to Roswell, I was one of those armchair researchers who read every book about it, watched interviews, seen documentaries, but I never actually stepped foot on the site where it happened or spoke to people directly involved. I mean, we spoke to a granddaughter of Jesse Marcel, the first military officer on site at the UFO crash. So we got to speak to Denise Marcel, his granddaughter, face to face and get her story that she learned from her father, in turn from her grandfather. So, I mean, when you have direct descendants of the family involved in this case still here to speak to, that's very exciting. And again, just looking at these people in the eyes and hearing them tell their stories, it makes all the difference in the world, Jim, besides just hearing about it in a book or seeing a fictionalized version of Roswell on television, or in movies. It's there. It's boots on the ground and going there and clearing up those misconceptions as well. We even went to the Roswell Daily Record, the local newspaper that broke the story of Roswell and had that famous headline, RAAF captures flying saucer in Roswell. So we got to go there and learn about how that headline came about and the whole dramatic story behind all that when it was retracted the next day and changed to a different headline. So a lot of new stuff.
To me, the thing about that whole case is the idea, if I'm correct, the base came out with basically a press release, wasn't it? Or
yes.
And that didn't happen by accident. Somebody didn't slip while on their typewriter. I mean, that was a very specific and distinct action to take to write that. And I highly doubt that somebody would have just made that up out of whole cloth. And to me, it's like, it seems pretty obvious. Oh, we let the cat out of the bag, and we shouldn't have. I mean, that's the smoking gun more than anything that I can think of. Now, in terms of you, did you walk away from this? And you don't have to give us specifics because we want people to tune in. Did you come away more persuaded that aliens potentially crashed in the desert there all those years ago? Less convinced about the same? Where did it leave you as a researcher?
It's funny, Jim. I mean, the UFO researcher in me, of course, wants to believe that this case was alien. And we did speak to several people who said there were bodies found at the crash site. So again, you can't really, you can argue that, but you can't completely dissuade that when you have people saying, at the local funeral home that the Army contacted them and needed 4 child-sized caskets when this UFO event happened. Why would you need child-sized caskets if a quote-unquote weather balloon crashed in the desert? So, I mean, the whole idea of bodies and Roswell is very compelling, something that we do want to look at further with Roswell Mysteries Decoded. But for me, I think the thing I came away with most with this entire project, with this investigation, is I believe we were able to definitively prove there was a covering of some sort. Who's at the source of that? What exactly they were covering up is still up in the air. It has been for 72 years. The cover-up started immediately when those first officers got out there and that headline came out. So now it's about dismantling that, trying to figure out the routes to go down. And whether or not it was alien or not, I don't care. I just want to know the truth. And it might not be a truth that I want or that a lot of the public wants, but we just want to know. This is that case, like I said, that we just keep chasing. So if we can bring it to a new generation who has that passion and that excitement to get out there and keep looking at it. A lot of the older researchers, they're burnt out, Jim. I'm going to be honest. They're frustrated. They've never found answers. So we're trying to revive that, get people excited about the case again, and finally find an answer.
Well, you make a good point, and I've told this story on the show multiple times, probably with even you on the show. But I remember this had to be 10 years ago, I would say. And at that time, I hate to say it, I'm almost 50. But at that time, I was pushing 40. And so not an exceptionally young man. I wish I were 39 again, but anyway, I was something like 39, and I went to see at a local group here, a major UFO researcher, somebody you know. I won't say who, but I looked around the room, and I was 39, and I pushed down the average age by 40 years. I mean, the average age looked like it was about 70, and not to decry people who have been in this a long time and interested. They've contributed a ton. They have great interest. They have great insight. They have great wisdom. I would never disrespect our elders. However, for anything to survive, you've got to bring along the younger generation. And I think you have been doing that through your work right along. And now with this television show, as you said, the things that we know about Roswell, having been involved in this for a while, like that newspaper headline from the Daily Record, like the supposed memory medal found by Jesse Marcel. We know that chapter and verse, but to these people who have never heard this case, Roswell is kind of a punchline. They don't know the specifics of the case. So really, I think what you're doing as a researcher, whether it's on TV, on your podcast, in your writing, it's a service because you can speak to that audience a way a 50-year-old guy like me can't. So I really applaud what you do.
Well, thank you. And I hope that's what I can contribute to the UFO field. If I never find an answer to Roswell, fine. If no one else says, then maybe it is one of those ones that will never know the truth. But if I can get younger people interested, I am considered one of the youngest UFO researchers, but I don't want it to be that way. Will I take that up? Sure. It's great. It's fun. I love doing this. It's a topic that means the world to me, literally. It could change everything if we ever truly knew what UFOs were. But for me, Jim, I think it's about learning what we can from that older guard, from our mentors, and building upon it. Never, putting them down because, what they did is gone. It's to the dinosaurs. That's not true. I wouldn't be where I am today or know the information I know about Roswell without Stanton Friedman, without, Tom Carey, Don Schmidt, all these people who've put decades into investigating this case. We'd have nothing to work with if not for them. So let's build off of that. Let's get the younger people interested who have that technology, have access to things that a lot of people don't. And let's get out there and keep looking. That's all I can say about that.
I like that way of thinking. Before we go to the break, and we'll share this again at the end of the show, but if people want to tune into Roswell Mysteries Decoded, how can they do that?
Yeah, it's very easy. You just go to cwseed.com and just look for Roswell Mysteries Decoded. It's free to stream whenever you'd like, for many times as you'd like. So yeah, just cwseed.com. And
we'll also put a link into the show notes at jimharold.com as well. When we get back, we're going to talk about the next chapter for Ryan and what's coming and some exciting developments, and then pick his brain on what cases and what topics in the UFO field are exciting him the most these days. We'll be back with Ryan Sprague on the Paranormal Podcast. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to empowering the evolution of consciousness. Now, I've been telling you for years how great Gaia is, but Gaia has just gotten a whole lot better. Now, Gaia remains a video streaming service for people like us who love the Fortean, the metaphysical, the unexplained. But Gaia has upped its game, yes indeed. First, there's all new shows and all new seasons for 2019. Also, there's Gaia's live stream access to watch and participate in events from anywhere in the world. Now, a couple weeks back, they were covering the 17th annual Conscious Life Expo, which, get this, Gaia annual members could actually watch live, and the archive remains for them on demand. Plus, Gaia is rolling out all new member benefits, including discounted tickets to live events, workshops, and exclusive interviews. The great thing is, whatever your device, Gaia has an app. You can watch Gaia on all of your devices: Android, iPhone, Apple TV, your iPad, your Fire TV, your Roku, your computer. If you're listening to this podcast, you can indeed watch Gaia. Now, Gaia has a community of over 500,000 members, and it's growing each and every day. Here's some of the great programming that you're missing out on if you're not a member. Cosmic Disclosure with Emery Smith, modern advances from ET Tech. This subject has always fascinated me, the idea of extraterrestrial technology and how we might be using it. In this episode, Emery will explore the anatomy of living interstellar vehicles and consciousness-assisted technologies. Or perhaps you would want to check out Undisclosed, Physics of the Future Now. This one with Randy Weitenheimer and Emery Smith. And Randy and Emery discuss the progression of physics from our current conceptual model of the universe to new ways of thinking. And later in the week, we've got a new episode of Missing Links with Greg Braden, talking about the language of the divine matrix and much, much more on Gaia. Now, that's just a smidgen of what you get with Gaia, and you can't get it anywhere else, and you can't get it unless you are a member. So let's fix this. Don't miss out. Go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim. Now, over there, we picked a few shows, a few videos that you can watch, and you don't have to log in or give your email address or anything, just to give you a little taste of what Gaia is all about. And you'll see guests like Lauren Coleman, John D'Souza, and more. And I think that's so cool that Gaia did that for us. Once you see those videos, you're going to say, Jim is right. This Gaia, it is fantastic. He's not kidding. It's user-supported, it's 100% ad-free, and it's absolutely worth 99 cents to try it out for 2 weeks or become an annual member for even more benefits. So please navigate over to Gaia.com/Jim today. Check out those shows and then sign up with that great deal. Go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. I love it. You'll love it. Thanks, Gaia. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is UFO researcher, podcaster, blogger, TV personality Ryan Sprague, and we're talking all about Roswell and some of the other topics in the UFO field that are exciting Ryan these days. Now, one thing I know you've got to be excited about, I understand that the first Roswell special that we're encouraging people to tune into online for free, it was so successful that there's going to be more, right?
We are certainly hoping so, Jim. I mean, I can't really say 100% yet personally, but as soon as this thing aired, it did air on the actual CW network once and then went to their streaming service. The numbers were far beyond what any of us expected, and we were called into a meeting the following day. So if that doesn't say enough, I don't know what is. And, you know, we left it very open. How do you investigate a 72-year-old case in 1 hour? You know what I mean? So by the end of our investigation, we knew there was so much more we still had to do. And we want to start going down those other routes. You know, were there bodies? What can we find out about that? What are the other explanations for what could have crashed out there? There's some pretty dark and sinister theories about what may have actually happened out there in the desert, possibly not involving aliens, but something much scarier and darker. So those are some things we want to tackle in a second 1 hour special. And I can tell you right now, it's looking pretty good that we're going to be back out in the desert pretty soon. Excellent.
Well, we'll have to stay tuned for developments. So now I know we spoke at the end of last year, and when you were doing all these podcasts, seemed like such a long time ago, but it was only a couple months ago. But over the last couple of months, I know you come out with your show, Somewhere in the Skies, your podcast on a regular basis. What are kind of the hot button issues the last couple of months that you've seen? Is there a case that's really caught your imagination since we talked last?
There's a few I can really think of that stand out to me, Jim. One is with a gentleman you had on your show recently as well. And that was Hellier, right. The story of Hellier, right. And Greg and Dana Newkirk, the investigators. And that one really, really stuck with me. We have the famous Hopkinsville Goblin UFO case in Kentucky many, many, many years ago. But this is sort of an updated version of that. These goblins might be back and messing with people again up there in the Appalachians. So I thought it was really interesting to see this coming back, to see these amazing investigators tackling it. So I had the director of Hellier on, Carl Pfeiffer, not too long ago. And that one really stuck with me, Jim. It really hit me in many different ways. This whole idea of synchronicity and what role that plays within the paranormal field and high strangeness and what it means to each and every individual who experiences it. So that's one that really stuck out to me. I do a series every now and again called the UFO Happy Hour, where I just have someone on. We throw back a couple beers and just let loose on UFOs. Yeah. If you ever want an uncensored version of the podcast of Somewhere in the Skies, just look for the UFO Happy Hour episodes. But, my most recent one is pretty interesting as well. I had a young woman on named Amy Sharatito who runs a YouTube channel called Vintage Space. And she is a spaceflight historian, a pop science writer, and an author. She just came out with a book recently called Breaking the Chains of Gravity, the story of spaceflight before NASA. So a lot of people don't know, there was a lot of spaceflight and early experiments before NASA came around. So Amy covers all of this. She covers a lot of the private space sector stuff that's going on right now with SpaceX and, exoplanets and all these things that are somewhat connected to UFOs and somewhat not, but she really brings it to a grounded level. And I recently had her on to talk all about what's going on with private space exploration versus government-funded space exploration, where we're headed within all those fields. And I even asked her a little bit about UFOs, and I was very surprised by some of her answers about astronauts who've witnessed UFOs. So yeah, people should definitely tune in for that.
We will have to check that out for sure. Now, I want to go back to the Hellier conversation a little bit because it kind of loops back to something I think we've spoken about before and I think is interesting. I think many of us, particularly those of us a little more mature, were almost brought up in the ET hypothesis. In other words, it is extraterrestrials, and that's, and I think that people who generally follow that line of thinking, leave room for like hoaxes, of course. Unfortunately, we have people who hoax sightings in terms of UFO sightings. Also, misinterpretation of military testing and those things. But then if it doesn't fall into one of those or just somebody simply mistaken, which I think that would be a good percentage of UFO sightings, you take those three explanations out. The fourth tends to be it's aliens. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. But the thing is that as I've talked to more and more people over the years about this, that maybe that's maybe a little simple thinking in the sense that we just always think that it's got to necessarily be little green men or women in some kind of a craft. But the possibilities are much, much greater than that, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, in my first book, I interviewed hundreds of witnesses who had UFO stories to tell. And there was a healthy percentage of those people who also had, supernatural or paranormal or high strangeness experiences connected to their UFO event. One woman in particular in Michigan had a triangular UFO sighting with her two daughters present who had this experience with her. And you had some strange stuff going on, Jim. I mean, the mother was feeling euphoric and peaceful as she's looking at this UFO, and it was completely silent, hovering above her, while the daughter is covering her ears and saying how unbearably loud the craft was, and she felt immediate threat by this thing. But so I thought that was interesting, that the perception of what was going on was altered in the moment. But not only that, they started having weird poltergeist activity happening in their home not too long after this, and seeing shadow people going throughout their home. And it just, there were so many cases I came across that really showed me that we are not dealing with just nuts and bolts craft, little green or gray men. And these topics I'm finding more and more seem to be more interconnected than I ever thought possible. So that's where my research is heading right now. I am working with people like Greg and Dana and some people in the parapsychological fields and psychology and even history and academia. This is a new project I'm going to be working on this year that I hope to have out by the end of the year, but connecting UFOs with the paranormal and all these other strange things in our world. Someday we might see a ghostly Bigfoot coming off a UFO, and I'm all for it, man. I am all for it. I'm sick of little green men.
But it doesn't mean that I guess what I'm saying is that it wouldn't necessarily mean that the ET hypothesis is wrong, but it's just a part of it. It's not all of it necessarily. Does that make sense? Absolutely.
I mean, maybe some UFOs are aliens. Maybe some are not. We honestly, we don't know. And anyone who pretends to have the answer is not someone I really want to be connected to. That's when you got to run for the hills for sure. So yes, as long as we have all these people in all these different facets of science and technology and theology and psychology, as long as they're all looking at it and taking it somewhat seriously and that ridicule factor is shed, maybe we can start to find answers and find those connections. That's what I hope for, at least.
What is the weirdest case, either something you've researched directly or you've heard about it secondhand? What is, if you had to pick an all-time weird case, what would that be for you?
All-time weird case. Ooh, that is a really, really good question. I mean, for me, there was one that really sticks out to me that happened in New Zealand in 1959. This is a case I'd never heard of until I reached out to some of my fellow colleagues in Australia and New Zealand. And they brought to my attention a woman named Eileen Moreland, who, when she was tending to animals in her farm back in the late 50s, a craft landed on her farm and a silver-suited being came out and started speaking to her in a language she'd never heard before, got back in the craft, and took off. Now, I mean, this sounds like a classic sort of contactee case, but it was really interesting. The New Zealand Air Force got involved when she reported this. They actually came out and interviewed her and investigated it. And you got to think, too, this was during the height of the Cold War. They took this very, very seriously. And they sent more than like 4 Air Force investigators to go and see what was going on. Now, is it possible this could have been maybe Russian and they crash landed and what she was hearing was a Russian dialect that she was not familiar with? It's very possible, but it's a case that's really intrigued me, and we still don't have any answers as to what happened out there, but it's a really weird one. If anyone wants to check that out, I did do an episode about that as well over at the show for episode 72. So definitely check out that one. It's called Finding Mrs. Moreland.
Well, we certainly asked for a weird case, and I guess that fits the bill. We talked a lot on the Roundtable special about To the Stars Academy and what it means to ufology. Are they making good progress? What's going on? Doesn't seem like we've heard quite as much lately, and I've seen some online comments, people being critical that not enough is happening. What's the update on To the Stars Academy? Of course, that's the group founded by Blink 182 member Tom DeLonge, and much publicity, and I haven't heard much lately. What's going on with them?
Well, seems to be the big contention right now, Jim, is this company seems to tease a lot and produce very little, which unfortunately we are very used to in the UFO field. So, I mean, for me, I'm still on the sidelines just observing all of this as an unbiased observer and journalist. I don't want to be, on the pro side or the con side of To the Stars Academy. I just want to see what they come up with. They said that they had some groundbreaking developments within their project called Adam, which is testing possible alien materials that have come across their desk. And apparently there's some explosive announcement they're going to be making shortly about that. But again, it's that whole, we have the info, we just can't tell you yet. That's really frustrating people. Another big development, though, however, is that several UFO researchers have discovered through FOIA requests that ATIP, this Advanced Aerospace Threat Protection program, I should say, that the secret Pentagon program is a better way to put it. This was not the only project looking at these aerospace threats or possible UFOs. We've just come to know that there is another project that was happening at the same time that had more money involved with it than this project, the $22 million that was given to the ATIP program. So that's exciting. I think that's a new development that we're just learning about, that this was not the only UFO program that the Pentagon was looking at. So where that may lead, I can't really tell you, but we're going to be getting a lot of new books and documentaries and movies coming out this year from To the Stars Academy. So if we're not going to get any solid UFO information, at least we're going to get some interesting and entertaining UFO media. So I'm excited about that.
I think there's a lot to be excited about in the sense that I feel like we're making some progress. There were a few years where I thought we were just kind of like going in circles, but I think there are new people involved like you. And I have a feeling that things are progressing, however slowly they may go. They're never as fast as we want to be, but I do feel that things are progressing. If you look back the last 2 or 3 years and different things that have been made public and about the government's activities and so forth, it seems like things are turning slowly. It's kind of like an old rusty wheel where you got to get out that big can of oil and try to grease it. But it seems like it's fighting against it, but it's starting to turn slowly, and let's just hope that accelerates.
Exactly. Disclosure does not come quickly. I just tell everyone, be patient. It'll be worth it. I hope.
Well, we really appreciate your time today, Ryan. We wish you all the success in the world. So tell people where they can tune in for the podcast, for the TV show, and to stay tuned with everything you do.
Absolutely. Again, the Roswell Mysteries Decoded special is free to stream at cwseed.com. Otherwise, if you want to listen to the podcast, it's always available right at my website, somewhereintheskies.com, and on all podcast apps just like yours, Jim.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We highly admire what you're doing. You're doing great stuff. Keep doing it. And again, thank you for joining us today on the Paranormal Podcast.
My pleasure, my honor, Jim. Thank you.
Well, thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Paranormal Podcast. I certainly appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And if you want to keep up to date to everything that I do, and I have various podcasts we don't necessarily always promote as much as we should, like the Campfire Show and my True Crime Show and so forth, and my Plus podcasts. There's a way to stay tuned into everything I do, not just this show. It is called my Herald's Happenings email newsletter. You can get it for the low, low price of $0. All you have to do is go over to jimherald.com and sign up. I hope that you will, and keep up to date on all the various shows, the books, personal appearances. That's one way we can get the information to you for sure. Can't necessarily always rely on social media. Can't put it all in the shows or else it'd be a plug fest. So this is a way to stay plugged in. It's the Herald Happenings email newsletter, and I hope you'll check it out. Thanks so much for being a part of the Paranormal Podcast this week, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.